Hi, algebra students. Welcome to today's lesson on simplifying numerical expressions. So today we're going to be using something called G.E.R.M.D.A.S, which is the order of operations. It's like your recipe for success if you want to get problems correct when they ask you to simplify an expression. Okay, so G.E.R.M.D.A.S is my version of PEMDAS, which is something you should be familiar with. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do when we are asked to simplify a numerical expression is to check to see if we see any grouping symbols. So I usually represent that with the letter G. Grouping symbols can be parentheses, brackets, absolute value symbols. So as I look through this problem and I read it from left to right, 12 divided by 3 plus 5 times the square root of 81, I do not see any grouping symbols. So I can move on to the next step, which is ER. That stands for exponents or roots. I don't see any exponents, but I do see a root, so I'm going to go ahead and simplify the root, keeping everything else the same. Okay, so again, I didn't see any exponents. I did see a root. I simplified it already. The square root of 81 is 9. So I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is multiplication or division, now from left to right. It's very important for you guys to know that multiplication does not always go before division. It just depends on which one comes first when reading a problem from left to right. So if I read the problem from left to right, the division appears before the multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and divide 12 divided by 3, keeping everything else the same. And then I can do the multiplication. Remember, we're on the step MD where it's multiplication and division from left to right. The last step is addition and subtraction. Again, those also need to be done from left to right. They're equally important. It just matters on which one you see first when reading the problem from left to right. 4 plus 45 is 49. Since there was only addition, you didn't have to worry about finding addition or subtraction. That's all you had to do there. So I'm kind of going to set up my recipe over here so that I know what to follow. Again, I don't see any grouping symbols, but I do see an exponent. Now, the exponent belongs to the 2. So I'm going to go ahead and bring everything else down, except I'm going to evaluate or simplify 2 to the 5th. So 2 to the 5th means you're multiplying 2 with itself 5 times. If you have a calculator, usually for exponents, you use this button. It looks like an upside down B. But if you need help figuring out how to put exponents in your calculator, let me know. 2 multiplied with itself 5 times gives you 32. And you're ready to move on to the next step because there are no more exponents or roots. Multiplication or division from left to right. In this case, I see the multiplication before I see the addition. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply before I divide. Now you should be doing these problems step by step. You can't just put the original problem in your calculator and get the answer. I'm still focusing on multiplying and dividing, so I'm going to go ahead and bring everything else down, but divide 32 divided by 4. Finally, I'm left with only one option. Remember, the last step is always adding and subtracting from left to right, but I only see a subtraction, so negative 48 minus 8 is negative 56. Just want to remind you that when you're watching these videos, you can pause, you can rewind, you can, stop at any point to catch up if you want. So if I'm going through these too quickly, feel free to rewind or stop the video, start it over, etc. Okay, setting up my recipe for success. I see a grouping symbol. Now within that grouping symbol, I have to subtract 3 minus 11. Notice I kept everything else the same. Now, I still have the parentheses, right? But the parentheses are only around the negative 8. There's no other number inside the parentheses. So I'm ready to move on to the next step. exponents or roots. I do see an exponent, negative 8 squared. Okay, really quickly, if you put this into your calculator, you're going to get negative 1, so 1 negative, and 2 eighths, which is going to be negative 64. So your calculator, if you put negative 8 to the second power, it's going to say it's negative 64. That is not what we want here. We want to put parentheses around the negative before we put the squared so that the calculator knows that that negative is not by itself. It belongs to the 8 and it needs to appear twice. So negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. I don't see any more exponents or roots, so now I'm moving on to multiplication or division. I do see I see division. 64 divided by 4 is 16. No more multiplication or division, just an addition. Okay, next one. We have a grouping symbol. So remember, G stands for grouping symbol, but this grouping symbol is special because it's called absolute value, which measures distance. And distance is always positive. So when I subtract 9 minus 12 and I get negative 3, in order for me to find the absolute value of negative 3, I need to consider how far negative 3 is from 0. So how many spaces is negative 3 from 0? Just 3 spaces. Now, what are we going to do with the 3 once we find the what are we going to do with the 3 once we say that it's the result of the absolute value of negative 3? Because the 5 was right next to the grouping symbol of absolute value, that signifies multiplication. So imagine that there is a multiplication symbol in front of the absolute value. So it's not going to be 53, it's going to be 5 times 3. All right, so as I think of my recipe for success, I already took care of the grouping symbol, which was absolute value. I see I have an exponent, 2 cubed. That's 2 times 2 times 2, 8. I move on to multiplying and dividing because I don't see any other exponents or roots. There is multiplication. And finally, addition or subtraction from left to right. Same with multiplication and division. Don't forget, you can pause the video in between steps too. You don't have to wait for me to explain the whole problem. You can, after I explain a step, you can push pause, then push play. Then I do another step and you can push pause to give yourself time to put this in your calculator. Okay, following G.E.R.M.D.A.S, we're going to do the grouping symbol first. Now within that grouping symbol, I have an exponent and subtraction. Which one goes first? Exponents always go before subtraction, so I'm actually going to do this guy first. 5 squared is 25. I still have those grouping symbols, so I can't stop until I get a single number. Okay, so let's pause for a second. If I read this problem from left to right, what does it say? It says 6 minus 2 times 10 divided by 4. Again, any number in front of a grouping symbol has an imaginary multiplication symbol. So there are no roots or exponents in this problem, but I do have multiplication and division. I have to do it from left to right. So I have to first multiply negative 2 and 10, or the way you could think about it too, instead of thinking about it as negative 2 times 10, is you can Just do 2 times 10 and bring down the subtraction. Keep doing multiplication or division before you do any addition or subtraction. Okay, now this next problem may look really intimidating. So what I recommend is to actually break it up into 2 parts. Find the solution or the answer to the top part first, and the answer to the denominator, the bottom. And then once you have the answer to the top and the bottom, you can reduce the fraction or divide. All right, so let's talk about the top first. I do see grouping symbols around the 9. Those are parentheses, but you see how the 9 is by itself? So those grouping symbols aren't there for you to do anything on the inside. It's to remind you that it's multiplication with the -2. All right, so the grouping symbol around 9, there's nothing we can do there, so we can move on to exponents and roots. There's a root. I don't see any other exponents or roots, so I move on to multiplying and dividing. Again, remember there's an imaginary multiplication between the 2 and the 9. And important, guys, once you get to that last step, addition and subtraction need to be done from left to right. So I have to do this subtraction first. 6 minus 18, which then gives you -9. So that's going to be the answer to the top, which is called a numerator. The bottom is asking you for the distance or absolute value of the answer for the inner operation, 8 minus 11. So how far is -3 from 0? 3 spaces. And you put that over here. Now you can just reduce the fraction. -9 over 3, or -9 divided by 3 is -3. As always, if you need extra help, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope you guys have a great day. See you soon.